After graduating, I put my grandparents' $1 estate into a protected trust. When my family said they'd taken the house, I just said, we'll see. 2 days later, they returned with movers and froze at who was waiting with a folder. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into my grandparents' driveway on a Tuesday afternoon in late October was that the lockbox was already gone from the front door. Not moved, not misplaced. Gone. I sat in my car for a full minute, engine running, staring at the brass door handle where a Century 21 lockbox had been hanging just 4 days earlier. The kind my grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, had never authorized. The kind that somebody in my family had installed while I was finishing the last requirements of my master's program in estate law at UT Austin. As if I wouldn't notice. As if I was still 22 and too afraid to ask questions. I was 26 now. I had a degree, a bar card pending, and I had spent the last 8 months quietly, methodically, building a wall around everything my grandparents had left me. They didn't know about the wall yet. I turned off the engine, picked up my phone, and called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice already carrying that particular brightness she used when she was either very pleased with herself or very nervous, usually both at the same time. Darling, are you in Dallas yet? I'm in the driveway, I said, of Grandma Ellie's house. Want to tell me why the lockbox is gone? A pause. Brief, controlled. Oh, your Uncle Derek handled that. We decided it was time to move forward with listing the property. The estate has been in limbo for months, sweetheart. It's not healthy. The estate has been in limbo, as if I were a problem of inertia, not a person with legal standing. We'll see, I said, and hung up. My name is Jade Whitmore. I am the only grandchild of Raymond and Eleanor Whitmore, who built a modest but meaningful life in the Lakewood neighborhood of East Dallas, over 50 years of marriage. Grandpa Ray was a civil engineer. Grandma Ellie taught high school English for 31 years. They were not flashy people. They drove a 2009 Honda Accord until the day my grandfather's health made driving impossible. And they spent their vacations at a lake cabin in East Texas rather than Europe. But they were careful people, patient people. Over 50 years, the house had appreciated from a $47,000 purchase to a property worth just over $900,000 in the current market. Their savings, CDs, and a modest investment portfolio added another $140,000. The lake cabin was assessed at $78,000. When my grandfather passed 18 months ago, followed by my grandmother just 7 months later, she simply did not want to live without him, the doctors said, and I believe them. I was named sole heir of an estate totaling approximately $1.1 million. My mother, Sandra Whitmore Holt, had not spoken to her own parents in 11 years, a falling out over money, ironically. Her brother, my Uncle Derek, had maintained a surface-level relationship with them mostly out of strategic proximity. Birthday calls, the occasional visit when he needed something. My grandparents were not fooled. They saw what he was, which is why they called me. In the last 3 years of their lives, I drove from Austin to Dallas 11 times to sit with them, help them sort their affairs, and listen. Really listen. They knew what would happen when they were gone. My grandmother told me over a pot of Earl Grey tea on a Thursday afternoon in February, "Your mother and your uncle will come for this house, Jade. Don't let them. It's yours. We built it for you." I promised her I would handle it. I kept that promise. Quietly, carefully, and with the same patience they'd spent a lifetime modeling. The moment I understood that this was going to be a fight, not a conversation, not a family discussion, a fight, was the week after my grandmother's funeral. We were sitting in the living room of the Lakewood house, the same room where my grandmother had read to me every summer growing up, and my Uncle Derek stood in the center of it like he was already measuring for new furniture. He was 53, broad through the shoulders, with the easy confidence of a man who had always talked his way into things and talked his way out of the consequences. He ran a mid-size landscaping company in Plano that was perpetually on the edge of some new expansion and perpetually undercapitalized. My mother sat on the floral couch, her hands folded, wearing the expression she put on when she wanted to seem reluctant about something she had clearly already decided. "We've been talking," Derek said, not bothering with preamble, "and we think the most practical thing is to list the house as soon as the estate clears probate. Split the proceeds 3 ways. I looked at him for a moment. There's no 3-way split. Grandma and Grandpa's will names me as sole heir. You've seen the will. Wills can be contested," he said, almost pleasantly. My mother added, softer, "We just think it's fair, Jade. We're family. Your grandparents wouldn't have wanted to create division." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just said, "Let me look into the process." I drove back to Austin that night, and instead of sleeping, I sat at my desk and started making calls. The first call was to Professor Martin Giles at UT Austin's School of Law, my thesis advisor and a man who had spent 28 years in estate litigation before switching to academia. I told him the situation in full. He listened without interrupting, which was how I knew he was taking it seriously. "First thing Monday," he said, "call Renata Cross at Cross & Morales Estate Law. She handled the Brennan family trust case. You remember from the reading list. She's aggressive, she's precise, and she doesn't lose." The second call was to my grandmother's longtime accountant, Harold Veston of Veston & Associates in Dallas, a 67-year-old man who had managed my grandparents' finances for 22 years, and who had been present when their final will and testament was drafted. He confirmed what I already knew. The will was airtight, executed properly, witnessed correctly, and filed with Dallas County Probate Court. "Your uncle tried to call me last week," Harold said with a flatness in his voice that told me everything, asking about the estate assets and timeline. I told him I couldn't discuss it. Third call. My grandfather's longtime attorney, James Whitfield of Whitfield and Partners in Dallas, who had drafted both the will and, as it turned out, a document my grandparents had prepared 18 months earlier that I hadn't fully appreciated until that moment. Your grandfather came to me specifically, James said, because he was concerned about family interference after their passing. He was very specific about what he wanted. There's a provision in the estate plan, Jade, a revocable living trust, converted to irrevocable upon his death, that holds the real property. The house, the cabin, they went into the trust before your grandfather died. The probate court doesn't control them. I went very still. The will covers the liquid assets, he continued, but the real property, the house, the lake cabin, they're held in the Eleanor and Raymond Whitmore Family Trust. You are the sole named beneficiary, and as of your grandfather's passing, that trust is irrevocable. I remember gripping the edge of my desk, not from panic, from something closer to reverence. My grandfather, an engineer by trade and a methodical man by nature, had seen this coming. He had built the wall himself. He had just been waiting for me to find it. I retained Renata Cross the following Tuesday. Renata was 44, a former Harris County Assistant District Attorney who had shifted into estate litigation after watching too many families get steamrolled by relatives with lawyers and no patience. She was 5'4", wore her hair in a natural and impeccably maintained, and had a voice that could be warm or surgical, depending on what the room needed. Our first meeting was 2 hours long. I brought every document my grandparents had given me, every communication with Harold Veston, every text message from my mother and uncle going back 18 months. I had been keeping them, screenshotted and backed up to a private Google Drive folder called Family Correspondence that had been sitting there since the February afternoon my grandmother warned me over Earl Grey. Renata looked at the stack and then looked at me. You prepared for this? She said. They prepared me, I said. She nodded once, like that settled something. Okay, here's where we are. The Whitmore Family Trust is valid, irrevocable, and you are the beneficiary of record. Your uncle and mother have no legal claim to the real property whatsoever. The liquid assets are in probate, but the will is clean and they don't have grounds for a legitimate contest. Can they still file a contest? Anyone can file anything, she said. But a frivolous contest costs money and time, and I'll bury them in motions before it gets anywhere near a hearing. The more pressing question is whether they do anything to the physical property before we can get a formal notice of trust in front of them. She paused, and I saw the calculation moving behind her eyes. Have they taken any action toward the property? I thought about the lockbox that had appeared on the front door 3 weeks after my grandmother's funeral. The real estate agent, a woman named Cheryl, something from a Dallas brokerage, who had apparently toured the house at my uncle's invitation. The text from my cousin Brent, Derek's son, asking what I was planning to do with all that old furniture. They've been treating it like it's already theirs, I said. Renata picked up her pen. Then we moved fast. The next 6 weeks were a kind of controlled war conducted entirely through documents and phone calls, and the quiet machinery of property law. Renata filed a formal notice of trust with the Dallas County Clerk's office, establishing the Whitmore Family Trust as the titled owner of the Lakewood property and the East Texas cabin. She sent certified letters to my mother, my uncle, and the real estate brokerage that had apparently agreed to list the property on Derek's representation that he was an authorized party. The letters were polite, specific, and contained phrases like unauthorized assumption of authority over trust assets and potential liability for conversion. The real estate agency dropped Derek as a client within 48 hours. I know this because the brokerage manager, a woman named Patricia Engel, called Renata directly to clarify their position, which was, succinctly, they had not known about the trust, they were immediately withdrawing from any proposed listing, and they were very sorry. My uncle Derek called me that same evening. I let it go to voicemail. Jade, his voice was tighter than usual. I don't know who you've been talking to, but you're making this into something it isn't. We're family. Your grandparents would have wanted us all to sit down and talk about this like adults. Call me back. I played it for Renata. She noted the date and time and added it to the file. My mother texted me the next morning. Jade, sweetheart, can we please talk? Derek says you've hired a lawyer. I don't understand why you feel the need to make this adversarial. I love you. I read it 3 times. The specific phrasing, I don't understand why you feel the need, was something I had heard my entire life. It was the family's preferred grammar for any situation in which I had the audacity to assert that I existed. I saved the screenshot. 3 weeks after Renata's letters went out, I drove back to Dallas to check the property. This was late October. The air had that dry, particular chill that Dallas gets in the fall, when the heat finally breaks and everything smells faintly of cedar and distance. The Lakewood house sat on a quiet street lined with mature oaks, the kind of house that had absorbed decades of cooking smells and Sunday mornings and arguments and reconciliations, and the specific silence of 2 people who had chosen each other so completely that even their quiet was companionable. I sat in the driveway for a moment, just breathing, and then I noticed the lockbox was gone. I had expected anger when I saw it. Instead, I felt something colder and more focused. I took out my phone and photographed the front door, photographed the driveway, where tire tracks in the soft edge of the lawn suggested more than one vehicle had been through recently. Called Renata on the walk to the door. Someone's been here, I said. Have they breached the property? I tried my key. The lock turned. The door opened. I stepped inside and stopped. The house was different. Not ransacked, not obviously disturbed, but there were gaps. The mahogany side table that had stood in the entry hall since before I was born was gone. The framed print my grandmother had loved, a Georgia O'Keeffe reproduction that had hung above the fireplace for 40 years, was gone. A brass floor lamp from the study, the set of Waterford crystal in the dining room hutch. I stood in the living room and felt my breath go shallow. They had come in. While I was in Austin finishing my degree, while I was on the phone with Renata drafting notices, while I was trusting the legal machinery to hold, they had come in and started taking things. Not everything. Not in a way that looked like theft at first glance. In a way that looked like family members picking up personal items they felt sentimental about. I sat down on my grandmother's couch. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I thought they would shake. Jade, Renata's voice in my ear. They removed property from the house, I said. Personal items, maybe 8 to 10 pieces I can identify immediately. I paused. I'm going to need a full inventory. I'll call you back in 10 minutes, she said. She called back in 7. I'm contacting an estate inventory specialist. Woman named Carol Diaz. She does this for court proceedings, bonded and certified. She can be there Thursday. Don't touch anything. Don't confront them. Take photographs of every room. I spent the next 90 minutes walking through my grandmother's house with my phone camera, documenting every room, every empty space, every absence. I had been in this house hundreds of times. I knew where everything belonged. I photographed the pale rectangles on the walls where pictures had hung, the empty spaces on shelves, the living room that felt subtly, wrongly light. Then I went to the garage, where my grandfather had kept a small safe bolted to the concrete floor. It was still there, still locked. I opened it with the combination my grandmother had given me 2 years earlier, written in her precise English teacher handwriting on an index card that I had kept in a fireproof box in my Austin apartment. Inside, the original certificates of title for both properties, the original will, a sealed envelope with my name on it. I sat on the garage floor and opened the envelope. Inside was a single index card in my grandmother's handwriting. Jade, if you're reading this, things have gone the way we feared. Don't be angry. Be thorough. We love you. Grandma Ellie and Grandpa Ray. I held that card for a long time. Then I put it in my bag, locked the safe, and started making more calls. Carol Diaz arrived Thursday at 9:00 a.m. Sharp in a white Ford Transit with Diaz Estate Services. Court-certified inventory specialist on the side in clean navy lettering. She was 51, had worked as a probate court liaison for 11 years before going independent, and carried an iPad loaded with inventory software that dated and GPS tagged every photograph. She walked through the Lakewood house with me for 4 hours. Final count, 37 items confirmed missing, cross-referenced against insurance photographs my grandparents' homeowner's policy had on file, a standard feature of their insurance plan that my grandmother, bless her organized heart, had kept meticulously updated. The missing items included the mahogany entry table, insured value $1,200, the O'Keeffe reproduction, $4,400. It was an authenticated print, not just a poster. 6 pieces of Waterford crystal, $2,100, a set of first edition books from the study, $3,800 per the last insurance update, and a collection of my grandmother's jewelry that had been in a velvet case in the master bedroom closet and was now entirely absent. The jewelry alone was insured for $1,500. Total insured value of missing items, approximately $41,000. Carol Diaz handed me her certified inventory report on a USB drive and in print, signed, and sealed. This is court ready, she said. I've done this 100 times. This is clean documentation of a removal event. I thanked her and called Renata before her van had left the driveway. It's not family members picking up mementos, I said. It's coordinated removal. 37 items, $41,000 in insured value. Renata was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. I'm filing for a temporary restraining order on the property today, and I'm calling my contact at Dallas PD's Property Crimes Unit. Detective Carlos Reyes had been with the Dallas Police Department for 16 years, the last 9 in property crimes. He was methodical, unhurried, and deeply unimpressed by the Whitmore family's apparent assumption that a trust document was an inconvenience rather than a legal fact. He arrived at the Lakewood house on Friday morning with a colleague, reviewed Carol Diaz's inventory report, photographed the property himself, and sat across from me at my grandmother's kitchen table with a legal pad. You have documentation of what was in the house prior to these removals? He asked. Insurance records, photographs, and a certified pre-death inventory that my grandparents' accountant, Harold Veston, helped them prepare 2 years ago. I set it on the table. This is a copy. He looked through it, made notes. Do you know who had access to the property? My mother, Sandra Whitmore Holt, had a key. My uncle Derek Whitmore also had a key, given to him by my grandmother for emergencies. I was not informed about his key until after her death. Did you change the locks after she passed? I paused. No, I should have. He wrote something. The trust document. Can I get a copy? I handed him the copy Renata had prepared. He looked at the first page, looked at the notarization, and nodded slowly. So the property has been held in trust since before your grandmother's death. Since my grandfather's death 18 months ago. It converted to irrevocable at that point. And your mother and uncle were aware of this? They were notified by certified letter from my attorney 6 weeks ago. He put his pen down. Ms. Whitmore, I want to be honest with you. What you're describing, removing property from a trust estate after receiving legal notice of its status, is not a gray area. This is theft. If we can document who removed these items, we're looking at a felony charge depending on total value, which in in this case appears to cross the threshold. My stomach dropped, not from surprise, from the weight of it. These were my family. I understand, I said. He picked his pen back up. I'm going to need contact information for your mother and your uncle. That night, I called my mother. She answered with the warm voice again, but thinner this time, stretched over something tight. Jade, I've been hoping you'd call. I feel like things have gotten so out of hand. Mom, I kept my voice even. A detective from Dallas PD's Property Crimes Unit came to the house today. He's opening an investigation into the removal of items from the estate. I need you to understand what's happening. Silence. Jade, those were family heirlooms. They belong to the trust, which you were notified about, in writing, 6 weeks ago. Your grandmother would have wanted— Mom, I stopped, took a breath. I have the insurance inventory. I have Carol Diaz's certified report. I have the notice of trust on file with Dallas County. Detective Reyes has all of it. What you and Derek did is being investigated as a property crime. I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling to tell you that if those items are returned to the property by Sunday at 5 p.m., I will ask Detective Reyes to note the voluntary restitution. If they are not returned, I have no ability to stop what happens next. Another silence, longer this time. You're serious, she said, quietly, like she was finally, actually seeing me. Grandma Ellie prepared me for this, I said. I promised her I'd handle it. I kept my promise. I heard her exhale. It was a strange sound. Not angry, not strategic, just tired maybe, or something past tired. I hung up. Sunday at 3:47 p.m., I was sitting in my grandmother's living room when a moving truck pulled into the driveway. I had been ready for this moment in my head for months. In the actual moment, I felt something simpler, clarity. I had called Renata the night before. She had driven up from Houston that morning, because that is the kind of attorney she was, and she was seated in the floral armchair beside the fireplace with her laptop open and a cup of tea she'd made from my grandmother's kitchen cabinet, looking for all the world like she belonged there. Harold Veston had driven over from his office in North Dallas, 77 years old, in a pressed gray suit, seated at the dining room table with the complete estate file open in front of him. James Whitfield, my grandfather's attorney, had joined us via video on a tablet propped on the mantel, his courtroom gray hair visible in a small Dallas office window, and Detective Carlos Reyes was standing in the front garden with a colleague, parked in an unmarked sedan at the curb, there not to make an arrest, but to document and observe. The moving truck stopped. The cab doors opened. My Uncle Derek stepped out first. He was wearing a weekend jacket, his hands in his pockets, squinting against the afternoon light. He reached back into the cab and pulled out a manila folder, the kind of casual prop that a man uses when he wants to look like he has paperwork on his side. My mother got out of the passenger side. She saw my car in the driveway. Then she saw Renata's rental. Then she saw Harold's Lexus. She stopped walking. Derek came up the path, his face arranging itself into something reasonable, something paternal. He was the kind of man who believed, fundamentally, that confidence was the same thing as authority. He reached the door and saw me standing in the open frame. Then he saw the people behind me. He looked at Renata, who had come to stand at my shoulder. He looked at Harold at the dining room table. He looked at the tablet on the mantel with James Whitfield's steady face. Then he turned and saw Detective Reyes, who raised a hand in a polite, unhurried wave from the garden path. Derek's folder dropped to his side. I said, "Hello, Derek." He looked at me. He looked at the folder. He looked at the truck behind him, where his son Brent and two other men I didn't recognize had climbed out and were standing by the cargo doors, very still. "We brought the things back," he said finally. His voice had changed. The ease was gone from it. "I know," I said. "That's why Detective Reyes is here to observe the return and document it." Renata stepped slightly forward. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm Renata Cross, Ms. Whitmore's estate attorney. The items will need to be inventoried against Carol Diaz's certified report as they're returned. Once that's complete, we'll provide documentation to Detective Reyes confirming full restitution, which will be included in his investigative file." Derek looked at my mother. My mother was looking at the ground. He put the folder under his arm. "Fine," he said. "It took 2 hours to unload and inventory the truck. Every piece came back. The O'Keefe print, the Waterford crystal, the first editions, the mahogany table, every piece of my grandmother's jewelry, sealed in the velvet case. Carol Diaz was on the phone the entire time as I walked through the inventory, checking each item against her report. At the end, she confirmed 37 items out, 37 items returned. Detective Reyes signed off on a restitution confirmation. Renata handed Derek a document as he was walking back to the cab. He looked down at it. "What's this?" "A formal agreement, signed and witnessed, in which you and Sandra Whitmore Holt acknowledge the Whitmore family trust's legal title to the real property and all contents, and agree to make no further claims on any estate asset. In exchange, Detective Reyes's investigation will be noted as resolved through voluntary restitution rather than prosecution." She paused. "You should have your own attorney review it before you sign, but I'd suggest you do it today." He stood there in the driveway of my grandparents' house in the late October afternoon, looking at the document. His son Brent was watching from the truck. My mother stood by the passenger door, her arms crossed, not looking at anyone. Derek signed it. He handed the pen to my mother. She hesitated for a long moment, long enough that I felt something move in my chest, something complicated and old, something I didn't have a clean name for. Then she signed. They got in the truck. They drove away. I stood in the doorway of my grandmother's house for a while after the sound of the engine faded. Renata put a hand briefly on my shoulder. Harold Veston, who had known my grandparents for 22 years, blew his nose into a folded handkerchief. James Whitfield's face on the tablet said, "Your grandfather would be very proud. I walked back into the living room. The O'Keefe print was propped against the wall where the movers had left it. I picked it up and hung it back above the fireplace. It looked exactly right. 6 months later, I live in the Lakewood house now. I moved in January, after Renata completed the full transition of trust assets into my name. The lake cabin I've kept too. I spent a week there in March, sitting on the dock with coffee in the mornings, watching the water. My Uncle Derek's landscaping company, I'm told, is in a difficult period. My mother and I have not spoken since October, but she sent me a card at Christmas. It said, simply, "I hope you're well." I read it twice. I kept it. I don't have a clean story about forgiveness. I'm working on it the way my grandparents worked on everything, slowly, carefully, without rushing toward a feeling I haven't actually arrived at yet. What I have is the house, the print above the fireplace, the safe in the garage with my grandmother's index card still inside, which I have not moved and will not move. I have the trust documents, filed and irrevocable. I have the promise I made over a pot of Earl Grey on a Thursday afternoon in February to a woman who knew exactly what was coming and prepared me anyway. I kept it. That's all she asked.